Good morning, everybody. I want to thank the Baker Polito administration for putting this together, along with Sigmund Community College, a great partner, not our good partner, our great partner, that is so involved in the community and has a stake in just about everything we do up here, from training police officers to helping our advocates to making our office better. We got a great partnership. And I especially want to thank all the survivors, everyone that has been through hell. And I want to thank the Baker Polito administration for putting this together to help us close some loopholes to get better on this. My father was in politics. He said, Joey, you can always get better. And this is a perfect example of where we can get better. This is badly needed legislation. And there's been a real push to get this done. And I want to thank the governor and lieutenant governor. It's going to help our victims whose pain is obvious, who go through the anxiety, who go through the tears, the fears, sometimes the depression of not knowing, am I going to be okay? We've got victim witness advocates in our office. Margaret Ruamba runs a great unit. Eddie Kakasinas, one of our first assistants, does a great job helping with regards to domestic violence. But this bill is going to help bring together badly needed legislation to protect victims and keep people in the community free from dangerous individuals who face charges in court. Our main goal in all of this is to protect the community, protect our victims from additional violence. For this reason, it's our office's policy, for example, to always request a dangerousness hearing when someone has a gun, when that lethality is in someone's hand. Because firearms, we know, are a game changer when it comes to violence, especially when it comes to domestic violence. However, even when a gun is not used, this violence can leave scars. The physical and emotional violence that persists if a defendant is let back into the community. And too often we're looking back on this and say, well, what could we have done better? And we do it, an after-activity type of review type of thing like the Army. It's one thing the Army gets right. But we look back and say, what could we have done differently? How could we have made this better? And this legislation, as prosecutors, will allow us. And as prosecutors, we should have the ability to request a dangerousness hearing when public safety and victim safety is of concern. It's up to the judge to decide ultimately who's going to be held and who's not going to be held. But we've got to have the opportunity to bring this to a hearing. Not allowing us to request these hearings prevents us from really advocating effectively for all our victims. And that's just not right. Our victims, our prosecutors have several victims who are still in fear. They're confused by the court system. When the perpetrators of their pain are released, when they're facing charges and either placed under bail or certain conditions that they don't feel will protect them. This bill will protect them. It will allow our prosecutors to seek a dangerousness hearing at any point in the criminal proceedings. This bill will allow appeal decisions if we don't feel we've gotten what we need in the district court to a superior court judge. Under the current rules, a judge and a prosecutor can only look at the crime that the person is facing while considering whether a dangerousness hearing is warranted. In some cases, we see people with long criminal histories that have to be considered because this defines the person and tells you who the person is and what they're going to be. But we're unable to utilize those histories. That's just wrong. The dangerousness bill will hold a defendant in custody until a disposition of the case. Whereas currently a person held on a dangerousness hearing remains in custody for 180 days in superior court and 120 days in district court. A person's dangerousness and potential harm for victims doesn't diminish over a set number of days. We need this tool. Currently, there are several crimes where we can't seek a dangerousness hearing. For example, some of our most egregious crimes, those involving sex offenses with regards to children pornography, where the perpetrator is in the same home as the victim or have access to the home. Being able to seek detention for someone who preys upon children, arguably, along with our elderly, the most vulnerable of our community, will allow us to protect our victims and all children in the community. For victims, this bill will also improve the system to help notify them, stay in communication with them, to let them know when a defendant is going to be released. That is something we need to be able to do. Police will also be empowered to detain people observed violating pretrial release conditions instead of having to wait for a court hearing to determine if conditions were violated. Now look, That's just just common sense law enforcement. And I thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for being here today. And if we could.
Thank you very much, Mr. District Attorney. I want to thank Secretary Reidy for helping us with this, and I especially want to thank Community Voices for your work, not just today, but period. And I want to thank very much the folks we're going to hear from in a few minutes. I think one of the people have asked me why fixing some of these common sense loopholes that exist in existing state law has been so hard to change. And I do think part of that is it's difficult to get survivors to speak publicly about what they've been through. And I completely understand that. And that's why we're honored in many respects and really grateful that you all are here today to talk a little bit about this as we make the case to the legislature to, as the DA said, close some loopholes and deal with some very real issues with the way our court system currently works that puts victims and survivors, in many cases, in a 24/7 sense of fear for their own safety. We held an event like this in Springfield and talked to a number of folks there, and one of the most compelling stories that got told was by a woman who had been badly abused. Her abuser was out and available on the street pending his trial, and she talked to her boss and said, "Can you tell me where the surveillance cameras are in our parking lot so that I'll know where I need to park when I show up for work and and make sure I'm parked in the right place when I leave, so if he comes at me, because he knows when I go to work and when I leave, at least we'll catch it on surveillance video." No one should have to get up in the morning and make a decision about where they're going to park their car based on where the cameras are going to be located, so that after they get attacked, at least there'll be video evidence of it that can then be used to deal with the circumstances and the consequences. But for us, this is really about hearing from you and giving you a chance to be part of this conversation as we continue to press for these common sense reforms on Beacon Hill. And with that, I'll turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor, who's been a huge advocate for the past 5 years on these issues.
Thank you, Gov. Thank you, DA Early, and to your entire team. Jen, thank you very much. We'll be hearing from Community Voices. You've been an incredible partner statewide to support victims of violent crimes. I want to thank EOPS and Terry Reidy and your whole department for your work. Most importantly, I want to thank you, the individuals here in the room that will speak about the tragic circumstances that bring us all here today. I see this proposal that we've made as leveling the playing field for victims. When you think about prosecution, one of their jobs is to hold perpetrators accountable, hold abusers accountable. That's their job. They can't do that without the support of a victim and a witness to come forward. So in order for you as a victim to come forward to tell what happened to you, you need to have the protections in place that will support you throughout that effort. Coming forward puts you in a more vulnerable place when your abuser is not required and made sure that he does not or she does not come back at you. And in this bill, it's so critically important that the defendant that is deemed dangerousness after a hearing is held throughout the disposition of the case versus the 180, 120-day rule that puts that person back out in front of you. I can't even imagine how that moment would feel for someone who did something so heinous and so horrific to you to know that they're back out there. That needs to be changed. We also need to expand the crimes, and this is for dangerousness. These are people who've done horrific things in their past and the present that brings them to the criminal justice system. Child rape, child sexual assault, child pornography. human trafficking. These are not currently triggers for a dangerousness hearing. It's beyond common sense. It's not acceptable for here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that we do not have laws that will protect victims to come forward and speak about their matter, to hold the perpetrator accountable so that they do not do that, not only to them again, but to others. And elongating that hold for a person deemed dangerous is critical. Elongating that list of violent offenses to trigger a hearing, to have a court have a full hearing to deem whether or not this person should be released is essential. Low bails, GPS tracking systems failing victims, that's not acceptable. That's why we're here today. I am so deeply grateful that we have the courage and strength of these victims to come forward again, because the trauma that they experienced in their life never goes away, and coming here in a public setting and sharing their story again is traumatic in itself. We thank you for coming today and helping us change these laws to better protect the people of this Commonwealth. I'm going to turn it over to Jen Lane. Okay. Do you want to introduce? You just have them introduce themselves? Okay.
Hi, my name is Mark. I'm here to obviously speak about the issues at hand here.
Can you pull the mic over there, Mark?
Absolutely, sir. I'd like to thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for the opportunity to speak today on the importance of the dangerousness legislation. I was once a victim of sexual abuse and rape at a very young age from a trusted family friend. The abuse spanned many years, and the offender filmed the abuse many times. I'm proud to announce that I am now a survivor of my troubling and traumatizing childhood. I'm also proud to disclose my current occupation as a full-time police officer. In confidence, I can admit that my childhood has led me to the occupational path that I have chosen. However, my family believes that the occupation chose me. The belief has been instilled in me by my parents to stand up for what you believe in. The provisions in the legislation benefit me mentally, but more importantly, would benefit the other victims included in my case. Standing up for something that can be changed for the safety of any, if not all, unfortunate future victims. The man who abused me, along with my sisters and several other children from 4 other families, was never held on a dangerousness status. Despite being charged with nearly 25 counts of child sexual abuse and creating child pornography of us as his victims, these offenses did not qualify for dangerousness. To make matters worse, the judge actually released the offender on personal recognizance. There was no ability to appeal this status. We did not feel adequately protected by the system. The offender being free throughout the duration of the case left us feeling very vulnerable and unsafe, especially because the offender returned to the same community where he committed these crimes. This legislation would remedy these circumstances. This man served a state prison sentence and was then released from prison using a new name to avoid detection. He twice violated his probation and his sex offender registration obligation. Once he had absconded to Florida and was returned by the Massachusetts State Police. Another time he was found living above a daycare in Boston. Each time he was released from court proceedings on his own recognizance. No bail, no dangerousness status. The judge extended his probation instead of reincarcerating him, again, leaving us feeling unsafe. At that time, I was in high school. As many understand, high school for most children is already an awkward phase in their lives. A sense of fear overcame my family. Imagine being a sophomore or junior in high school and having a fear to walk over to the soccer field, the football field, or even go for a run around the track for practice. While you're walking, you're paranoid that someone who once hurt your family is out in the general public. Will this man attempt to kidnap me? Will he follow and stalk me to intimidate me? Will he attempt to walk up to the soccer field as a spectator? Will he be targeting other potential victims? These are thoughts that no victim should be concerned with. Having victims been through enough trauma and stress, these unspeakable acts that this man was convicted are severe and a threat to the general public. I hear a lot of people say, to what end does one protect their family? My answer, there is no end. There is always something we can do to protect our families, loved ones, and even the general public. By making these changes in the legislation calls, we can increase public safety for victims, by, at a bare minimum, giving them the peace of mind that the person who once hurt them beyond belief is being held for a dangerousness hearing. I believe this will limit the unnecessary stress and trauma that victims already have to cope with. I'm respectfully requesting as a survivor that our legislative leaders to support moving forward on this legislation.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark.
My name is Michael. Thank you, Governor Baker and Lieutenant Polito, for having me here. At the age of 6, my sisters and brother were adopted. We all were adopted due to ongoing abuse by our biological parents. At first, the adoption was awesome, but as the years went on, it turned into a house of horrors. We observed domestic abuse by our adoptive father, and we all endured sexual abuse, physical and mental. At the age of 15, I was placed in a foster home. My foster parents helped me work through the fear, and they encouraged me to report my adoptive father to the police for the years of abuse, both sexual and physical. My adoptive father was found guilty of all counts and sent to 30-plus years in prison. It took a lot of courage to come forward and report the years of abuse endured. We were brainwashed and threatened by our adoptive father for years if we reported it to anyone. I felt accomplished and safe when I reported it, but within hours, my adoptive father bailed out with a low amount of $2,000. The feeling of safety diminished and living in fear returned. My adoptive father caused me to live in fear nearly my entire life. I thought I would be safe once he was arrested. Once he was out, I was terrified he would come after me because I reported him. At times, I thought about not testifying because I believed he would harm me. I was scared he'd fall through on his threats. It takes a lot to report someone. The emotional and physical pressure of the victim is enormous. A victim should not only feel safe, but should be safe, leading up to the trial as well during the trial. Although the prosecutor did an excellent job in the case, he had no recourse to appeal the low bail. He said his hands were tied as far as the bail was concerned. In addition, sexual crimes against children were not crimes the prosecutor could seek a dangerous status. It is so unfair that a child predator was able to be out on bail while the case was pending. My adoptive father was hands down a dangerous man, and it is unknown how many foster children were abused by him. I still, to this day, attend all the parole hearings for him to prevent him from being released. Thank you for considering changing the law. The law should provide protections for victims, especially vulnerable children. Michael.
Thank you, Mike. Much appreciated.
Hi, I'm Leanna. Thank you, Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito, for allowing me to participate in this important event today. In 2019, my 13-year-old daughter was sexually assaulted by a lifetime friend. For about 20 years, my husband called him a brother and a best friend. He was even the best man at our wedding. Our children called him uncle. He was like family to us. He lived with us many times, and he babysat our children on many occasions. It sickens us to think how many times he has been alone with our daughter since she was born. He took advantage of our daughter and her trust. He even sexually assaulted her with family close by. He took away her sense of security in her own home. He was supposed to protect her and care for her, not abuse her. She will never regain the innocence that he took from her. Our daughter now suffers from insomnia. Some nights she doesn't sleep at all. She has been diagnosed with anxiety and depression and sees a counselor to help her with her trauma. She is a different girl than she was before this all happened to her. Her schoolwork and friendships all have suffered as a result. She is even more self-conscious about herself than she was before this happened. She wears oversized clothes to hide her body. She is uncomfortable being hugged by anyone, even us as her parents. My instinct is to hug her when I see she is in pain, but there are times she cannot let us love her that way. As a parent, it's heartbreaking. We teach our children to trust the people we trust. This person we trusted as a brother, a best friend, and an uncle committed the ultimate act of betrayal against our child and our family. He groomed us emotionally before molesting her. It was hard to learn from his family that he had sexually assaulted other family members and friends. No one told us. We shut out a lot of people because of this. Had they told us, he never would have been allowed to care for our children. Our 7-year-old son was too young to understand that he cannot see his so-called uncle because he did bad things to his sister and is in jail. It made us question if we can trust anyone being in our home or with our children. Following this man's release from prison, it gave us great comfort knowing he was being monitored with a GPS device. Probation had set up exclusion zones that would trigger notification to us if he came closer to our home. Comfort gave way to utter panic when probation notified us that he had cut off his GPS device and his whereabouts were unknown. We were overcome with fear. My husband and I felt helpless to alleviate our daughter's fear of being kidnapped or harmed by him again. We worried he would seek retribution against us for prosecuting him. This new trauma and uncertainty escalated my daughter's anxiety and insomnia. Progress she had made in her healing largely evaporated. As a family, we lived on edge until the U.S. Marshal's Office arrested him months later in North Carolina. We assumed he would be criminally charged for cutting off his GPS bracelet. We had no idea that this was not a felony crime. He rid himself of the very mechanism that was supposed to provide us with protection and comfort. It's particularly upsetting because he pled guilty to lesser offenses and knew the GPS was a condition of the plea agreement. His cutting off the GPS was victimizing us all over again. This man is the most dangerous type of person you could ever meet. He abused the trust we had in him with our most valuable possessions. It is critical that the legislation be passed to give victims more protection. Otherwise, these offenders will continue to harm their victims and will make a mockery of their crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you.
My name's Morgan. When I was 15 years old, I was involved in a home invasion. I was home alone one summer when two men made way into my house. They started with the doorbell, raising my fear, so I called the police, and as the police were coming, they walked around the back. I had no idea what they had, what their mission was, what they wanted. I live in a community where nothing happens, and I would never expect this to happen to me nor anyone. I heard banging on my window as they were trying to make way. They opened the window and I heard pans falling from my sink. They made way into my house and I crawled under my bed in fear that if they found me, what could happen. And then I locked my door and I hid under their bed. They were trying to make way. They were wiggling the doorknob, and I heard the cops outside, and my fear grew instantly. I didn't know if they were going to try and hide. I didn't know if they would find me. Then I heard, "Put your hands up," and the cops got them in handcuffs, and they ran outside. The cops arrested them. They went to jail. But after this, I'd never expected the trauma that would come from it. I was in and out of therapy. The whole summer, I stayed at a friend's house when my parents were working because I couldn't be home alone. Even now, home alone, if I hear the littlest noise, I would look out the window. The fear that someone would do this again, would try and harm me, would want to harm me. We were in and out in court for a year, and I would have to look them in the eye because I just wanted I wanted to feel safe that they were in jail, knowing that they were there. They got out on bail. Well, they had bail. After a year of making a trial, they got out on probation. The fear that they're still out there and that I could run into them at any time has always been on my mind. I wouldn't wish this upon anyone. Thank you, Governor and Lieutenant, for being here and letting me share my story.
Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for here. Morgan's my daughter. I want to speak on the parent side of that situation, what we went through. Thanks to the District Attorney's Office as well, who supported us through this. We went through many hearings. We felt this was the only way we could keep them in jail. We didn't miss one of a dozen hearings or so. As a parent, we still live with that. We had to put in an alarm system we didn't think we ever would need. And having her go through that, listening to that 911 transcripts was, I don't wish it upon anybody. They were both career criminals out. And that's another part of the problem, is trying to keep these people where they belong and not out. I think that no child, and all of you, my heart goes out to all of you here today. And if we can just, Morgan was strong enough to say to me, if we could just help one person not to have to go through this, whatever that takes and whatever we have to do that is where we should focus on. And thank you for being here, and thank you for listening to my daughter's story. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Baker, and thank you, Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito, for allowing Jennifer Lean of Community Voices to read my statement on my behalf. This is from a victim who has asked me to read on her.
Can you move the mic?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? As a very young child, I was sexually abused by my biological father and suffered abuse that no child should ever experience. My innocence was stolen from me. In addition to the sexual abuse, I was forced to watch movies of other children being sexually violated and abused. He told me to keep the movies and his touching of me a secret. My teenage uncle was also abused by my biological father and was forced to watch the abuse of me. Due to the sexual abuse of me by my biological father, the neglect of my mother, I was placed in DCF custody. I was eventually adopted and provided with a loving home and family, but I still suffer from the trauma that I experienced even now as an adult. I still have flashbacks of sexual abuse. The experience has left me deeply, emotionally, and psychologically scarred. There has been numerous times where I settled into deep depression with post-traumatic symptoms. I will never be able to forget what he did to me. I should not have to feel shame of myself or experience low self-esteem, but yet I do. My past has created this state of mind. I am haunted daily, some worse than others. My memories invade my mind, shrouding me in fear and anguish. What he did to me was monstrous and unforgivable. The judge set bail so low that there was nothing my family could do. There was no recourse. Even the horrific crimes my biological father was charged with and convicted of did not qualify him for dangerousness. If passed, this legislation will provide so many critical safeguards for victims that were unavailable to me as a child. I was unable to fight the law as a child, but as an adult I can now. Allowing my statement to be read is the first step in having my voice heard as the importance of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Much appreciated.
We jumped over Terry. Did you want Terry?
Thank you. Thank you to Quinn Sigerman Community College for hosting us today. This is our third roundtable with the governor and lieutenant governor, and I just want to thank you all for your bravery, for coming forward, and detailing the most horrific aspects of your life. I've said this at the Springfield Roundtable, and I mentioned it to the governor and lieutenant governor. I've had a lot of brave victims and witnesses and survivors testify for me when I was a prosecutor, and what I saw in Plymouth, in Springfield, and here today, outranks all of that. The bravery that you and the courage that you've all shown to come forward is amazing. One of the survivors in Plymouth said something that really resonated with me and the lieutenant governor and the governor. It's a basic human right to feel safe. That says it all. And DA Early outlined all the specific aspects of this legislation, how it will help fill gaps. And what that all boils down to is keeping people safe, keeping survivors safe, keeping witnesses safe, and keeping their families safe, because they're also affected. And we've heard that from numerous survivors. At the end of the day, what we want to accomplish with this legislation is to give prosecutors and district attorneys' offices across this state the opportunity to have a hearing. It's not police, it's not prosecutors saying someone's going to be held. It's going to be before judges. No one's due process rights are going to be curbed, and sometimes the judge has to make a hard decision. Sometimes they're siding with the defense, sometimes they're siding with the prosecution. And as I said in Springfield, that's our system. At the end of the day, it's allowing prosecutors to move for dangerousness on individuals that they feel are a risk to citizens or the community. Thank you again. I can't imagine the horror that you've all been through, and I really appreciate you coming forward today. Thank you.
As your lieutenant governor, I feel a deep responsibility to see this through. I want to thank you for coming forward, because the governor and I can't do this alone. If we could, we would have changed this a long time ago. Your coming forward today helps us make the case with the legislative body that these are significant gaps in the system and in our laws that don't protect victims like you. I also feel, as a mother, the pain and sorrow and suffering, sadness that you feel. And I know you speak for yourselves today, but you speak, and your voices speak for so many others. And what worries me a great deal are the victims that don't come forward and that don't hold the perpetrators accountable and don't participate in the system because the system doesn't support them in that process. The DAs, law enforcement, they're all trying hard to do their part, but without that victim coming forward, they can't hold these dangerous, violent people accountable for what they've done. And the only thing that we can do is to continue to push hard to close these gaps. The DA, Terry Reidy, outlined the provisions of this bill that to us appear common sense changes that will improve the system a great deal. And I can't imagine a reason why not to do this. What are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm deeply sorry this happened to you.
So let me just say, first of all, to reiterate what the Secretary and the Lieutenant Governor said, your voices in this conversation are incredibly important, and given the trauma and the difficulty that's associated with discussing it and reliving it, especially in a public setting, your presence here today is both remarkable and special. And you do speak for many people who aren't able to or just can't bring themselves to. And at each of the roundtables we've had so far, there have been a number of circumstances in which people agreed to come tell their story and then at the last minute said, you know what, I can't do it. And in a couple cases gave their testimony to somebody else to read it for them. And I think that speaks to some extent to the difficulty we face here, which is there are far more people out there who are dealing with this than we know about. And I would argue that some of them don't come forward specifically because they are known to the person who has been abusing them, and they know that person is out there. And I think one of the things that's most troubling to me about this is we're not asking to turn the criminal justice system upside down. We are asking to close some very particular and specific loopholes that are being basically advantaged to abusers who are awaiting trial. And in the case of several of your stories here, you don't even qualify. The fact that so many crimes against children in Massachusetts don't even meet the let's have a hearing test is outrageous. And in addition to that, the fact that the whole body of work doesn't factor into this decision about dangerousness is equally absurd. Add that to the fact that I can't tell you how many stories I've heard now about people cutting off a GPS, an ankle bracelet, and there is no consequence to that. None. And once it happens, and you spoke to this, right? You don't know where that person is anymore. You have no idea where they are. They could be in your garage. They could be in your yard. They could be waiting. One woman talked about the fact at one of these hearings where she didn't know it, but her abuser had cut off his ankle bracelet, and he beat her up while she was breastfeeding her baby. I mean, this is an easy solve. An easy solve. And people who hide behind this idea that this is some dramatic rewriting of the state code of regulation and state law are simply not being honest with victims and our community generally. Now, we know, as the Lieutenant Governor said, that this is not going to happen without the voices of folks like you. And I just can't tell you how much we appreciate your willingness to come here and share your stories. And I could tell, looking at your faces, in many cases, how painful it was to revisit this. And just know this, we'll do whatever we can to continue to make the case and hopefully be able to deliver what I consider to be some very reasonable, very appropriate, and very targeted reforms that can make it a lot easier for you and so many people like you to sleep at night and to go out during the day without having to look over your shoulder everywhere you go or try to find the surveillance camera where you park your car. And I'm sorry that we don't have the kind of statutory structure in place here that you deserve. You want to add anything, DA?
I just want to thank the Governor and Lieutenant Governor and all of you for being here. Like the Governor said, Lieutenant Governor said, Secretary Reidy, who did a great job with the victims from our office, it's so hard. No one understands your anxiety, your depression, what you're going through, but yourself. We can fix this. We don't need to take a draconian step. We need to have a hard discussion on how to make this better. And we couldn't do it without you. So thank you for being here today. Governor, Lieutenant Governor, like my dad used to say, I reference more, but it's just good government. Thank you for being here.
And thanks again to Quinsigamond. Much appreciated for hosting this. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody. So, folks, with that, we're going to transition to the Q&A portion. We're going to recognize all of
you have any questions? So I guess the first thing I'd say is that I learned once again that these loopholes are creating trauma that comes on top of the trauma that survivors and victims are dealing with. And that trauma is this general sense of fear and something bordering on panic about not knowing what might happen next. And to basically believe that the Commonwealth is not on their side, is not hearing their concern, not understanding and appreciating why it is that they are afraid. And the mere fact that so many crimes against kids don't even deserve a hearing here in the Commonwealth to determine if the person who perpetrated that crime or is accused of that crime or may have a history of those kinds of crimes, they can't even have a hearing to discuss whether or not that person is dangerous. Honestly, in the 21st century, just doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to me. And I think what we're going to do is continue to speak to survivors because their voices are incredibly important to making the case to the legislature that this is something that Massachusetts should do something about. We need to be on the side of victims and survivors here, not abusers and perpetrators. You want to speak to this, Joe or LG?
Well, one thing that the governor added, Lieutenant Governor added too, at a point where your perpetrator or the defendant is arrested, that should bring some comfort. You shouldn't be in a court and say, well, having a tough conversation with, whether it be one of our victim witness advocates who are here today, Reidy runs our domestic violence unit, saying, all right, we got a problem. We can't get him held on dangerousness. What do you mean you can't get him held on dangerousness? Isn't what happened to me, doesn't that matter? It does matter. But those are the type of things, you should have some comfort when there's an arrest. You should have some comfort knowing that the system's going to protect you. You should have some comfort knowing that this isn't going to happen again. But as the governor just stated, when that anxiety, because you're hearing it could get worse and he could be back out on the street, when you don't feel safe, and we know oftentimes in domestic violence cases, they're control crimes. When the person's losing control, that's when the victims at the most danger. These things have to be fixed, and again, I applaud the governor, Lieutenant Governor. We've got to have this hard conversation. It really isn't that hard a conversation, though. We need to tighten this up, especially with the child sex offenses. My God, these kids are our most vulnerable. We've got to do better. Thank you, Governor.
Just a couple of other points, too. The law does not allow a judge to set bail high in order to hold someone that he or she thinks might be dangerous. So there is no mechanism for egregious, horrific, terrible crimes like the ones you heard about today, child abuse, child sexual assault, rape of a child, human trafficking, to allow the court to hold that person. The other piece is the court embeds in its system the use of restraining orders or GPS tracking systems to create a level of safety for the victim. These measures don't protect the victim. They go away. They're temporary, or in cases like you heard today, the GPS tracking system was dismantled. These horrific individuals moved out of state, not to be known where they are. I can't even imagine for a victim who has experienced the trauma of the abuse, maybe multiple times, and then having to live in fear, not knowing if the next moment, the next day, the next night, it could happen to them again. That's why we need to change the law. It's a gaping hole that is not protecting the people of this Commonwealth. I just want to say again, I'm very appreciative of these victims coming forward to tell their stories. This is real. This isn't a movie. This isn't, something that's removed from us. It is real, and it's happening to people every day in this Commonwealth.
I do want to make one other point here, which is that So we've now had 3 of these, and we've had a whole series of stories that have been told. And I keep thinking to myself, when I hear these stories, what message are we sending in Massachusetts to somebody who's being abused or somebody who's being sexually assaulted about whether or not they should come forward and tell their story? Because the message we get at these hearings, the message we get at these roundtables is coming forward may in fact just make your abuser more angry than they are already, and they will likely be out again on the street because there won't be a hearing to determine, they may not even qualify for a hearing, whether or not they should be held prior to trial. This creates a tremendous disincentive for anybody who's in a situation like this to come forward. Because if you're already in a circumstance where you're feeling afraid, why would you go and make the person who is taking advantage of you or abusing you more angry than they are already by going to law enforcement if you don't have any confidence that the court system is even going to engage in a discussion about whether or not the person who's assaulting you should be held until trial? Other questions? Again, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I want to thank Quinsigamond, and I really want to thank the folks who came forward. That takes a lot of courage, and we would be nowhere on this without your voices, so thank you very much.